Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to focus in on delta tides and how they affect your daily fishing success. I'll walk you through a practical, straightforward approach on how you can incorporate tidal fluctuations into your daily fishing plans. My strategy revolves around what I call the 3 T's. That's tides, targets, and timing. Let's check it out. Keep in mind that our basic strategy revolves around tides, targets, and timing, but we also need to consider seasonal weather patterns and daily weather fluctuations. These are going to have a great effect on how the fish move from spot to spot, and we'll have to incorporate this when we're making our daily plans. Mastering the tide, it's not easy. I know it sounds simple, but it's not. Each piece of this puzzle changes hourly, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And the fish, they're always on the move, constantly reacting to a complex, ever-changing underwater environment. So just remember, it's how we, as anglers, adjust and adapt to these very same changes that will ultimately lead to our daily success or failure. To understand the strategy that we're going to be laying out today, you have to have an understanding of tides and tidal fluctuation. So I want to talk about that before we get into the actual strategy. So when I start to plan my day, it usually revolves around, before going out, I'll hit a website. And the site that I use is Tides for Fishing. I'm going to pull up that website and we're going to navigate around it a little bit. I'll show you how I use the website, and I'll show you the basic information that I pull from that website on a daily basis. And really what I'm looking for: the tides, when we're going to have a high tide, when we're going to have a low tide, maybe moon phases, and some coefficients. That's how much water movement we're going to have. So let's pull into that website and we'll walk through that, and then we'll get into the basic strategies. Pulled up our Tides for Fishing website, and you'll know you're there if you look up the top left-hand corner. You'll see this goofy little fish, and it'll say Tides for Fishing. So this is the right spot. This is what the site looks like. So the first thing we need to do is look at our location, and we want to make sure that this location, it may not be the location we're starting at, but it will be the location that we will want to be fishing around. So we may be starting, launching the boat out of Rio Vista, but we're going to go we're going to go into the San Joaquin River and fish down by Frank's Track or Paradise Point or somewhere like that. We don't want the location to be Rio Vista. So today what I'm going to do is talk about fishing, I'll say out of Paradise Point, which is my home launch, and that is right at Disappointment Slough, Bishop Cut. So what we want to do is go down here to locations. I'm going to hit locations, and you can see one of my recent sites is Bishop Cut, Disappointment Slough. This is where I'm going to be launching, and I know I'm going to be fishing in this area, so I want the appropriate times for the area that I'm going to be in. So I'm going to hit Bishop Cut here, and now we see that the tides and the lunar charts are going to be for the Bishop Cut, Disappointment Slough area. I know I'm launching here, and let's say I'm not going to be fishing for a full day, so I'm going to stay right in this area. I have all the needed information that I have that I'll need. So the next thing I want to do is look at the day, because we want to make sure that we are on the right day. Because remember, tides come in from the ocean into the river twice daily, 12-hour intervals, 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day, and the times change every day. So if we were going to be fishing Friday or Saturday, we would want to be hitting the appropriate day that we're going to be fishing. So we're at Bishop Cut, we're on the right day. I'm going to start looking at my tides. I'll minimize a couple little boxes here. I'm going to scroll up. The first thing that we want to look at is our daily tide chart, and it looks like this. I'm going to open this up, and this gives us the high tides and the low tides. You'll also notice that it gives us these little fish icons down here. These are times of high lunar activity. And remember, we talked about blending tides, targets, and timing. We want to be at the right place at the right time. So remember, these are the tides that are going to be right around where I'm launching my boat, and I know I have some spots that I believe there will be fish there. And let's say my first spot I know that I want to fish is a spot that is needs to be flooded out. It's a ledge, and on top of that ledge, it's only maybe a foot deep. So what I need to do is have a high tide so that that ledge floods. So if I am looking at this map, I have a high tide at 5:45 a.m. If I really wanted to fish that ledge, I would probably get at the ramp at about 5:45, and by the time that tide starts moving out, when we get a little bit of movement, I could be on my spot by maybe 6 o'clock right in here, and I could be fishing the high tide on that ledge that's flooded, and I know that I have a couple hours to get in and fish that spot. Now, the other thing I would look at is this lunar activity down here, and I know that I have my spot, which fishes best at a high outgoing tide. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be at the right spot at the right time, and I have lunar activity going on. That's going to be a good time to be there, so I might get up early in the morning on this day because I want to fish that spot number one right here. Now, other factors would be weather. Maybe I'll get a little breeze. That could help the fishing here. So, I'll factor in some other things. Now, let's say conversely, my number one spot is a flat that is covered with surface vegetation, and I want to fish frogs, and it fishes best at low tide. So we have a low tide at 2 o'clock. If that's what I want to fish, if I want to be doing my frog fishing, I probably want to hit that at the last part of the low tide or the first part of the incoming. So do I want to get up at 5 or 4 in the morning to fish this spot? No. Probably get up at 10 o'clock. I want to be at the ramp at, let's say, 1 o'clock or maybe 12, and I want to fish this tide here because I know I'm going to have a low tide. I know this flat is going to be covered with good vegetation, and I want to frog fish. Maybe not so much at dead tide, but the last couple hours of the outgo and the first couple hours of the incoming, this would be my spot that I would be fishing for my number two spot, which would be a spot that fishes better at low tide. Now, if I came out and I got here at, say, noontime, and I fished my frogs right in here, maybe I had lunch at 2 o'clock because I don't like fishing dead tide. I had some good lunar activity. Other factors that I would be looking at right in here for topwater frog fishing is maybe a little bit of breeze, and maybe if I was fishing out from that vegetation, if I got some cloud cover, that would be great for topwater fishing right in this area here. But if I was going to stay out till the evening, I would be fishing my number one spot or my number two spot, the flat, right in here. And, as I got up to here, the same spot that I know fishes better on high tide, I would want to be at that spot right as we're getting a high tide here when that area gets flooded or whatever spot that I'm fishing needs to have that high tide. So you can see how we can kind of correlate the tides, the time, lunar activity, so on and so forth, into our daily fishing plans. Now, once we do that, we can also, I'm going to minimize this, I'm going to come up to or down a little farther. We're going to see this tide chart here, and this gives us the tidal coefficients. Now, tides are set by moon phase, and generally the higher tides with higher coefficients are centered around the full moon and the no moon. So as you can see here, we've got a half moon, a half. We have very low tidal coefficients. Every tidal coefficient will have a number. We have 44, 53, so on and so forth. As we get a no moon down here, you can see we have 101, 98, 90. These are high tidal coefficients. We want to look at the tidal coefficients, and we want to know what they're going to be on that day, because our areas that we fish, we may have some areas that fish better when we have a lot of tide flow. We have other areas that may not fish as well when we have those big tides. This also shows our lunar activity for the day. So today, let's minimize this again, we were going to be out here the 23rd. We have a full moon, we have a high tidal coefficient, and we have a lot of lunar activity. So this would be a good day to pick to come out if we were going to take a day off work if it wasn't a day that we had. Now, conversely, if we go down here a little bit farther after the full moon, those tides drop out. We had a tidal coefficient of 79 here with a lot of lunar activity. We come down 4 or 5 days later, we've got a tidal coefficient of 58 with hardly any lunar activity in here. So this would be the time that I would want to be on the water if I was taking a day off. So now that we have this, we can go scroll a little farther, and this gives us our best times of the day for fishing, and this kind of takes into consideration all of the major periods of lunar transit and things like this, and we can also formulate that into our daily plans. So what I want to do now is we'll go back out. I'm going to hit a couple of spots, or maybe just one spot, and we'll pick that spot apart, and we'll talk about why we would want to be on that particular spot at maybe high tide or low tide, and we'll try to clear up how to navigate in and out of or up and down the delta as the tide moves in and out, so we can be at the right spot at the right time. Let's get back to the river. We're back on the water, and we're going to wrap this thing up. And as I said before, running tides is not easy. But I guarantee you, if you can stick with me through the remainder of this video, and this is the last portion of the video, we're going to take all these pieces that we've been talking about, the tides, the targets, the timing. We're going to put all of these together, and you're going to have all the pieces of the puzzle and all the information that you'll need to get out here, start running the tides, and I guarantee you, you're going to be catching more fish.
So you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
We all know how the tide starts at the ocean and comes into the river system and basically floods into basically the head of the channel up at Stockton, the port of Stockton. But remember, as that tide comes in from the ocean to the port of Stockton, it's not like it's on a railroad track where it just comes right down the main channel, hits the head of the channel up at the port, turns around and goes back out. As this water comes in, you have to remember, it's almost like an amoeba. It doesn't come straight down the main channel. As it comes through the channel, it cuts off on side channels, it cuts off on sloughs, there's flooded islands, and as the whole system floods, it kind of just morphs into high tide. So everywhere on the delta is a little different. The timing is a little different. Every place has areas that fish better at high tide. Every area has places that fish better on low tide, or maybe an incoming tide or an outgoing tide. So what we're really trying to do is look at the delta as a big city, and within that big city there's little neighborhoods all over, and we're learning the neighborhoods or our spots. Now within these areas or spots that we're learning, there's lots of little targets. And let's say we are fishing Frank's Track. We don't have to move from Frank's Track to find shallow water, to find deep water, to find tules, to find rocks. Same thing if we're fishing down here around Paradise Point. We can go within a mile or two and find as many rock banks, tule islands, channels, flooded ponds or islands as we can, that we can fish all day long. So within each one of these little areas, there's a lot of little targets. Now, let me go over this particular area, and we'll talk about the targets that are in this area. We'll talk about when we should be fishing them and why we should be fishing them, and why the most practical approach to running these tides is learning your neighborhoods or the areas of the delta, and then when you get to those neighborhoods, within that maybe 1 or 2 mile area, you don't need to run the tide from, the port of Stockton out to Rio Vista. You can find that area and then fish the targets within the area that fish better at the tide that you happen to be at that particular time. Boy, that's a whole lot. But let's talk about this. And what we have here, I'll go over it real quick. We'll move over here. We've got a flat here. We have a line of tules, and we have a ledge out here that has maybe 4 to 6 or 8 feet of water over the ledge. Remember, this flat behind us that we just looked at may have 1 to 3 feet of water. If we look over here, we've got an island, and that island has a point right over here. It has a bunch of little inlets that fish can spawn in and a bunch of little tule points. And then we have another island, or island point right down here. What we've just looked at is a small neighborhood, but it has targets all over. Let's start with the flat, and we'll talk about when we should fish the flat and what we would be doing on this flat. Okay, right now, low tide, the flat is matted up. Not a good time to be here. So if we started our day of fishing at noon and we came out here at low tide, this is not the place we'd want to start. Conversely, if we came out here at a high tide and this flat is flooded, what you would see is less surface vegetation. There'd be some lanes out here, some holes in the surface vegetation, and some areas that we could fish maybe with top waters. If the tide's high enough, we'd fish them with frogs. If the tide's high enough, we could throw certain top waters. Maybe we can even throw some chatterbaits or maybe some weightless, weedless worms. What happens here is when that tide goes up and we get these lanes in here, the fish will come in and they'll feed in the shallow water. They'll be looking for bluegill, they'll be looking for crayfish, and maybe other little bait fish that are in here. So this is a very productive place to fish at high tide, but it's not the place we want to be at low tide. So let's say we're out here at low tide, we come up to our spot, which we know there's fish out here, but we see this, and it's just not a good time to fish it. It's not setting up right. So what we do at that point, we come right out to here and we go to the ledge, because what's happening is those fish that were behind us at high tide on the flat, feeding on those bluegills and frogs and crayfish and things, as that tide drops down, they're going to come right around the corner and they're going to get on this drop off here, and they're going to be maybe out in 4 to 6 feet of water even at low tide. So if we're out here at low tide, this is an area that might fish really well at low tide. Now, what are we going to do on that drop off? In the wintertime, we may be fishing jerk baits, we may be fishing crank baits, we may be fishing spinner baits. You can fish drop shots, a lot of things you can fish on this edge, but you can see kind of where we're going. Now, sometimes this may fish really well at low tide because this is where the fish congregate in the deeper water. As this floods, we've got a lot of areas that the fish may pull up right into here on these tules. Now let's take a look right across the river. We've got the island. This island may fish at at a number of different tides. Maybe the points will fish great at low tide. Maybe the sides of the islands and these little inlets here could fish well at low tide, depending on the depth of them. But what you see again is we have an island point here, a lot of stuff to fish. Right over in here, we've got another island point, and on the other side, we probably either have another flat or a deep water side. Okay, we've just pulled onto this point right here, and as I pull up here, we talked about the flat that this island that's right here provided us coming down here. We've got a good point, we've got great vegetation, and you can see on this little inlet, we've got a little channel out here, and even though it's at low tide, we do have some fishing out here that we may be able to catch fish out on this edge. So we've got a little different setup from the last little inlet that we had. And also, if you look down here, we've got another ledge that has some current on it and another tule point. Guys, what I've just done is point out about, I'll say 7 or 8 targets within just a 100-yard area. And in wrapping this up, what I want to say is that you don't have to run a long way to find good targets at any one particular tide, especially when you're first starting out. So learn certain areas, know the tides, and as you catch your fish, make sure you're corresponding your fish catches to the area that you're catching the fish in and the tide that you're catching them on, so that you can run back to those spots at the same tide and hopefully rinse, wash, and repeat catching those fish. Now, if you come to that spot and the fish don't seem to be biting, look around you before you leave, because you may find an island point, or you may find a drop off. Or one thing that I didn't talk about is this other bank over here. We've got a rock wall. Now that rock wall, I guarantee you, has a trough on it over there, and there's a weed bed that's out about 6 feet from that rock wall. And at low tide, those fish are going to be on the outside of the vegetation. At high tide, they're going to be right up against that bank. So, you know, kind of one of the things that I did as we're sitting here talking, I talked about all these areas, but as I looked over there, I kind of, you know, it jogged my memory that, you know, I don't want to pass up that rock bank while I'm here. So think about that, getting all these little targets and categorizing them. Now, that's the gist of this entire video. Take into consideration tides, targets, and timing. If you guys have any questions, hit me up in the comments, and I'll try to answer all the questions that come in. And I think you guys can get out there and you have a fundamental base of information that's going to allow you to come out here and put these pieces together, start out catching some more fish out here. So I thank you guys for staying with me through this. I know this is a fairly dry topic, but I think it's a very important topic. And if you can get this all you know, put together, you're going to really start catching more fish out here on the Delta. So thanks for watching. Good luck. We'll see you guys on the river.